This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
The Archive.
Episode 100. Will more information drive purer economic outcomes?
Welcome to the Debunking Economics Podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie, and today, economics is based on information. In theory, equal information to everyone. But that's not how it works. But if you had more information, would we have less inequality? And would the system work better? That's today on the Debunking Economics Podcast. Well, it is one of the flaws of pure economics, isn't it? That to have perfect competition, you need perfect information. That when you buy something, you should know the price of all competing products. When you buy shares in a company, you should know about the pros and cons of that investment as much as someone who works in that company knows. Everyone should have that information, and they should all have it at the same time, which is, of course, a crazy notion, but that is the basis of pure economics. So before we get your views on how important it is, Steve, that we perhaps should continually strive to get closer to perfect information, let's hear the views of Joe Stiglitz. First of all, he's a Nobel Prize winner, professor at Columbia University, who questions the ideas of rational decisions and utility, both things I'm sure that we'll get into in this conversation. But here he is, first of all.
Well, for 200 years of modern economics, it was always assumed that information was perfect. Right. And not that people really believed that it was perfect, but they didn't know how to incorporate imperfect information into the theories. And the hope was that the world with imperfect information would be very much like a world with perfect information. Right. But you know, in our everyday life, we're always struggling with the imperfections of information, and we know that they're very important. They consume us. You know, when you hire somebody, you worry about how good they're going to be. What we do conveys information from one side of the market to the other, right? And that because I know that and you know that, it affects our behavior. Right. So, for instance, you may want to go to school longer. Not just because you want to get more education, as valuable as that may be, but also you want to signal to your employer that you are more able and that you can get through those hurdles that are required, and so that you're conveying information. The buyer of a used car knows that if he offers too low of a price, only guys who have cars that have lots of problems are going to be willing to sell it. So he starts to infer, if I offer too low of a price, I'm going to get a lousy car.
So he acts on imperfect information.
Exactly. And so one of the important applications of this is that, for instance, you may want to pay a worker more than the minimum amount that you need to get a worker, because if you pay a worker too little, you get a lower quality worker, he won't work as hard. Yeah. In the older theory, with perfect information, you never have to worry about incentives, you never have to worry about who you're hiring, because you know everything.
Right. So he's basically saying, forget this idea that we all make rational decisions, and I guess also, you know, a bit of the utility theory becomes redundant as well, doesn't it? I mean, it's, you know, there is no such thing as perfect information.
Well, first of all, I've got to say that Joe is one of the best of the mainstream, and his edition of asymmetric information is quite clever and insightful. So I'm not going to be knocking his work as I might Milton Friedman's work or even Paul Krugman's work. So Joe is one of the people that I regard as having made a major contribution within the constraints of the mainstream theory. But remember what he's talking about, perfect information. What economists mean by perfect information is not you know exactly where your coffee cup is, or in my particular case right now, you know where your remote control for the TV is, which we don't. Somehow we lost it 2 nights ago. We can't find the bloody thing in this small flat in Amsterdam.
Back of the sofa. It's always in the back of the sofa.
I tried. I found a 50-euro note. There was at least some that I couldn't find the damn controller. No, what they mean is perfect information about the future. We know what's going to happen in the future because we have perfect information. And this is even more extreme than what Keynes railed against back in the 1930s. One of my favourite phrases from Keynes, and I'll see if I can quote it without looking at it, was that I accuse the classical economic theory as being one of those pretty polite techniques appropriate for a well-panelled boardroom, which tries to deal with the present by abstraction from the fact that we know very little about the future, quote unquote. If Keynes was alive today, he would be out there throwing Molotov cocktails at the American Economic Association and all other institutions of so-called economics, because they now assume, rather than ignoring the fact that we don't know the future and talking about perfect information, knowing what prices are being offered by different suppliers and being able to work out who's offering the lowest possible price and buying from that supplier, they now assume you can accurately predict the future. That's what they mean by perfect information.
Right, from the present. So
from the present to the infinite future, to the infinite future. Okay, that is what they mean by perfect information. Now, in that context, what Joe's stuff is saying is really related to, in some sense, to the old idea of perfect information, which was we know everything now. I know that I've got a car which is a bad functioning car. You also know I've got a bad functioning car, so the price will be low. In fact, what happens is that I know I've got a bad functioning car, you don't. There's an asymmetry there, and I exploit the asymmetry. And then you get what's called a market for lemons, which drives down the quality and price of second-hand cars. That's the sort of information Joe was talking about.
But he is saying that if we had more perfect information, then the economy might perform better, isn't he? I mean, he's acknowledging the fact that it doesn't, because we don't have that perfect information. So we behave in ways which are not totally rational. And he gave that example. You might go to university not because you want to get a better education, but because you think it's going to help you get a better job and you're going to be able to pay more, get paid more. But which might be a very different reason. And the reason is because people are going to trust you more because you've been to university, rather than you actually have an ability to do the job any better.
Yeah, and that's quite valid. I mean, I'm not going to knock that as an argument at all. It makes a lot of sense. But it's an embellishment of the old-fashioned idea of perfect information being knowledge about the present to high accuracy, saying, okay, well, in fact, there's not high accuracy. Different groups have got different amounts of information, and the information asymmetry is the source of the market not being in a perfect equilibrium. That's the sort of stuff Joe's talking about. What it's been borrowed for as well is to say, what it ignores fundamentally, is we don't even have anything like decent information about the present. We have no information about the future. And why have I used the phrase information about the future? I got involved in a bit of heated correspondence with the then editor of the American Economic Association, AER, American Economic Review macro journal, when I submitted a paper of mine, which, by the way, I now know has a stock flow inconsistency in it, so I'm not going to defend the paper all that much. I've since improved the model behind it, of course. I submitted a paper modelling Minsky with price dynamics as well. And he wrote back to me saying he was going to reject my paper unrefereed because he really liked the verbal explanation of Minsky's hypothesis, but he wanted to see an argument about how markets cleared and that sort of thing. And I just basically went for the jugular, as you know I can do. And in the middle of the fight, he came out with a phrase, and I quote, "What if they get more information about the future? How would that change things?" Now, there's somebody talking about information about the future as if it actually exists. And this is what hasn't been directed by Joe's comments, because there is this, because of the whole idea of perfect this and perfect that, which is just abounds in neoclassical theory, all these pejorative terms in what they call a value-free science. Because of this idea of perfect information was so much a background of their thinking about this idea of perfect competition and maximum welfare, yada, yada, yada. It was so easy for them to fall into extrapolating that into the future and saying, well, if we all have the same model of the economy, and that model of the economy accurately describes the economy, then we all use that model to be able to say exactly what's going to happen if something happens in the economy today and predict its future consequences. Therefore, we know the future. Now, that is called rational expectations. And that is the greatest load of quad swallop that's ever been forced upon the Australian human population, with the possible exception No, I'm sorry. I think it's probably first place.
Well, okay, but what?
Maybe religion. But
well, we really don't want to go there.
But we don't want to go there. No.
But I mean, but what if you make changes today in the availability of information, and that does, will drive change in the future. You might not know how it's going to drive change in the future, but say for example, we know, and this is part of the reason I wanted to talk about this. In the news a lot lately, there's been a lot of discussion about gender pay gaps. And similarly, how much the BBC is paying presenters. Like, for example, John Humphreys, who does a radio show, gets paid £600,000 a year. I do a radio show in the commercial sector. I don't get paid £600,000 a year. So I'm glad I know how much he's earning now, because I know how angry to be about it, because I don't think he's really necessarily that much better than I am. But having that information obviously influences, for example, the way that should influence the way BBC operates and the way the broadcast industry operates. And if you had the same information available in all industries, it might change behaviour as well. And similarly, if we knew how much government spends on various projects, and we didn't have stuff which is commercial in confidence, why shouldn't I know, for example, how much a supplier is getting paid by the government to do a particular job? I mean, that supplier might be a little bit upset, but if they provide that, but if they don't want that information to be available because they think it's going to impede their ability to charge more to other suppliers, don't supply to the government. You see my point? It's sort of like if we had open government and open availability of information on salaries, we would have more perfect information. I'm just wondering how far you can spread that, and whether that does good for the economy or bad for the economy. What does it do for wages, for example? What does it do for the cost of supply and all that sort of thing?
How good an actor do you think Bruce Willis is?
I think he's certainly not worth what he's getting paid.
Exactly. And the whole reason that Hollywood salaries are outrageous as they are is that Bruce Willis, I've forgotten which particular movie it was, one of his movies, he demanded Die Hard. He demanded he went from sort of $2 million to $20 million. And because the franchise was so successful, the studios paid it. And then apparently every negotiation in Hollywood began after that. Well, Bruce is being paid that much. I want to get paid X much, which is just like you and that Humphreys radio presenter. If you're getting 600,000 quid, I want So
everyone else wants the same amount. So actually, in the Bruce Willis example, though, I can understand that, because if they believe he's going to make a movie and people are going to go and watch it because he's in it, then maybe he is worth 20 million or whatever he's demanding. But I think in lots of situations, and let's take that John Humphreys example, I reckon there's somebody who would do that job for 100,000 a year and do it just as well, and they wouldn't lose any audience as a result of it. So makes you wonder, why aren't they doing that? So I mean, there's two interesting examples, because one of them's got dollars attached to it in the Hollywood movie. The other one is a public sector salary, and and there's a lot of very high public sector salaries where if it wasn't being done by the person who's demanding those big bickies, somebody would do it for a lot less and do the job almost as well.
But what ends up happening, this is where I'd recommend Sandra Navidi's book, Super Hubs. It's a network effect. You become part of the network. You become perceived as the face of the BBC, which of course is, pardon me, but I've got so sick of it watching it for the last 4 years compared to the ABC back in Australia, which I have much more time for. It's the face of the Tory party, and you get seen as part of that network, and they want to pay you that much, because once you pay that much, you're going to be saying what the mainstream wants you to be saying. It's a network effect of feedback that keeps you in that loop, even if you aren't particularly good. And the reality is that most of these situations, if anybody else had been acting in that movie, not anybody else, but a wide range of other actors could have pulled it off just as well. If Pierce Brosnan had been in the role, for example. There's Daniel Day-Lewis is another kettle of fish completely. It's just Bruce Willis was successful because he was in that particular movie. This is again where Harrison Ford's success came from, being in Star Wars.
I think it's in Sweden. I can call up the tax office or whoever, some government department, and find out how much somebody else is getting paid. They will know somebody has asked. They'll know who's asked. But if I want to find out how much my co-workers are getting paid, I can find out. What's wrong with that? Would that push salaries up or drive salaries down, or just reach some sort of reasonable stage where people are getting paid what they're worth?
never the latter. I think the last point, it's almost likely to drive wages up. That's been the experience, particularly when you're talking about people in prominent positions. So again, one of the major arguments in favour of the incredibly outrageous levels of pay that chief executive officers get these days, managers of companies. The argument was if we pay them more, and also we pay them in terms of stock options as well, they're going to be more aligned with the interests of the corporation, and that'll be to the benefit of the corporation. Now, what it actually meant was it was in their interest to pump up the share price. And any way to pump up the share price they would do. So, for example, if you did less maintenance on your facilities and therefore had a lower cost level than you should really have, until you had a higher profit rate, which would give you an announcement that would cause your share price to rise, which would then come back and mean the shares which you were given vested in you and you had made an enormous profit out of it, you'd do it. And that is where, amongst other wonderful impacts of capitalism, where the Great Pong in Adelaide came from, because a privatised French company owning the sewage works over there made more money by not maintaining the sewage ponds properly until such time as the bacteria, aerobic bacteria that were processing it, died out, leaving only anaerobic bacteria, which of course gives us hydrogen sulfide smells. And Adelaide spent some years under what they call the Big Pong. And of course these huge rates of pay really come at the expense of shareholders rather than at their benefit, and given this whole inflation world. So I don't think getting rid of that information asymmetry will give us a perfect world where everything falls back to equilibrium again. It'll give those who've got the bargaining power the capacity to pull the Bruce Willis card out and say, well, if they're paying that much at Zaxo, I want 10% more for here because you want me to get you past Zaxo, you've got to pay me more money. And it became a way that extremely well-connected people could use to bargain and get more of the share of the surplus than they'd get otherwise. So rather than that improvement information actually leading to Humphreys falling back from 600,000, let's say 200,000 pounds a year, it meant that people would use that information, were that a private broadcaster, use the information to go and bargain for more money for themselves. So you get a star effect. It actually increases the level of inequality.
Right. Well, does it increase that? But wouldn't at the same time everybody else be saying, well, in that private organisation, look, Humphreys is on 200,000 a year. I'm his co-presenter. I want to be on 200,000 a year as well. The producer might say, well, I want to get paid a bit more too. And as you say, everyone's salary goes up. But if everyone's salary goes up,
because you're not part of the network. The Humphreys is the phrase person. The producer in the background, who gives a shit about him? We don't invite him to our parties. We don't know where he lives. We don't want to know where he lives. But Humphreys, he's the guy who's putting the word out there, and let's invite him to this function and that function and so on. He becomes part of the network. So this information becomes the way they get into the network, which makes them a huge amount of money.
So all you're talking about is an excuse for why you want to protect that network if you're part of that network. But what I'm saying is, breaking it down, isn't it good to if we had this asymmetry of information, the network would struggle to exist, wouldn't it? Because because you wouldn't be able to pay him 600,000. You could only pay him 200,000, and everybody else would be asking for more, and the variation in salaries would be less grand, and the network wouldn't be able to buy people as much as they currently are. If that's your argument.
No, I still think it wouldn't have anything like the beneficial impact that you're hypothesising here, and that Joe obviously has in his back of his mind as well, because I would rather see a higher level of income for the average worker. I'd rather see a basic level of income being determined than trying to cut down the tall poppies who get these network-associated salaries, because the real inequality is, first of all, the disparity of wealth. And then these people, we're talking about prominent people. You can't be arguing, this is not an argument between bakers or between university academics or courier drivers and so on.
It should apply at every level, though. I mean, if you're an office worker and you believe there's somebody in the office and you're doing an administrative task and you believe somebody else in the office is getting paid more for a very similar job, shouldn't you know that? And shouldn't you be on the same wage?
I see this as leading to a very destructive cycle, unfortunately, because what it leads to is people behaving in like a couple of monkeys fighting over one getting a cucumber versus the other getting the cherry. This is a valid point, but it doesn't seem that we actually address it successfully. The people will often complain that I'm doing better work than that person's getting, and we're just getting the same pay. What you actually find is when you start paying people differential amounts based on their perceived ability, you start breaking down the community that exists in that workplace. And there is that. Have you ever seen that wonderful video clip of I think a couple of capuchin monkeys, both inside? This is exactly your example. Both inside transparent perspex cages, being paid to do some operation for the experimenter, and one gets paid, and they show it up and they show exactly what they're getting, and one gets a grape, and then the other does exactly the same job and he gets a cucumber. And when he gets a cucumber, look at the cucumber, looks at the other monkey, looks at the experimenter, and throws the cucumber back at the experimenter. Now, beautiful, beautiful illustration, but what that is showing is the monkeys believe they should get the same return for doing the same thing, whether they do it well or badly. And it's a very deeply ingrained principle, not just in humanity, but in a wide range of species, of some degree of equal treatment. So what you're talking about is let's use the information that we know who is being treated and who is not. The very fact that you can be treated unequally while doing the same work is the source of this attitude, and it can lead to a form of social breakdown.
Right, and your point is that some people might actually be doing the job better. It might be the same job, but somebody is doing the job better than somebody else, which would be Bruce Willis's argument and John Humphrey's argument that I am doing the job 6 times better than somebody who's getting paid 100,000, and Bruce Willis is getting paid many millions of times better than somebody who could do it for a lot less. So yeah, so it's the quality of the work, and I guess that then relates to suppliers to local councils, for example. If someone is tarmacking the road for, Cambridgeshire Council, should Greater Manchester Council know how much they're getting paid so that they can negotiate better deals with people who are tarmacking the roads in their area?
Yeah, well, this is coming down to the issue of fraud, because quite frequently you'll see these developments occur where somebody's on the inside, they get a tender which nobody else gets access to, or they actually charge a higher price, they still get the position because the information is not being shared. What's actually being shared is some of the money from that going back into the pockets of somebody behaving corruptly inside the council, or for that matter, the private company and so on. So it's really about exposure of fraud. And there, of course, yes, I want to see that information published because, again, it seems to be, it's very different.
It's not just fraud, though, is it? It's also, am I getting the best deal? Is the government is the government getting
almost by definition with fraud, you don't get the best deal.
Yeah, but I mean, it could also not be fraudulent. You could just have purchasing managers who are just not very good at their job and just don't know how much stuff is worth.
Or you could have qualitatively different performance going down. I mean, for example, one of the reasons that we had the Glenfell disaster was that the people quoting to have flammable materials is the outside insulation of a building could underquote the others, and you just go for the cheapest price, and bang, we lose hundreds of people's lives. So it comes down to quality issues as well. But you do want to have that transparency in government to stop that type of corrupt dealing going on, because there certainly is and was tons of it. And we need to stamp it out, and that information does seem to work. It seems to be that in areas where you're talking about tendering and things of that nature, where it's a corporation being paid the money, then publishing the amount of money being paid and the terms in which they offered to fulfil the contract, that does seem to give you a stabilising impact. But when you do it for people and say, here's the amount of money the CEO of AXA is getting, versus the amount of money the CEO for Lloyd's is getting, then what you get is in the network, which they are part of, the one who's getting the low amount can then go and say, well, if you're paying that guy that much, I want 10% more. And what you get is a huge inflation in CEO wages, in radio presenter wages, in anything which gives you a star quality. You get a dramatic increase in inequality. You don't get a stabilising factor coming out of it.
Right. Don't think you have star quality in radio presenters. I think you're thinking back to the 1970s. Not anymore. So on the idea of government suppliers, though, I mean, I gave the example of someone who's tarmacking a road. Probably the governments or the public sector are the only people who want people to tarmac roads. But if you were to then say, well, okay, if we're doing it for that, we also want to do it for the supply of telecommunications. then you start to say, well, okay, how much is the government paying for telecommunications services? Then large companies would say, well, okay, now that information is available, we know how much we can expect from the same supplier supplying telecommunications services to us. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
That's where I have more time with the idea of providing that information, because that it does seem that when you're talking about tendering, when it's a corporation looking at the amount of money they've got to pay to get a particular service or to get a particular facility constructed, in that situation, knowing what rivals offer does seem to work as a way of getting lower markups, not necessarily better quality. This is one of the dangers of this total focus upon costs. We ignore quality. And that you ignore quality at your peril, as Australia is finding with its broadband speeds, which basically have one snail walking along a wire towards another snail to connect their antennas together to pass bits of data up and down people's homes. It's disastrously bad.
So the whole
focus on cost got us there.
This is sort of a part of open government in a way, isn't it? Which is something that's talked about a great deal. Actually been talked about for decades. And just for a bit of light relief, here's a bit of Yes Minister on open government.
What's wrong with open government? I mean, why shouldn't the public know more about what's going on?
Are you serious?
Well, yes, sir. I mean, it is the minister's policy, after all.
My dear boy, it's a contradiction in terms. You can be open, or you can have government.
But surely the citizens of a democracy have a right to know.
No, they have a right to be ignorant. Knowledge only means complicity and guilt. Ignorance has a certain dignity.
Yeah, well, there are. We're all blessed with ignorance, aren't we, as far as the government's concerned? But so equality of information is not a good thing in that case, what we're saying when we're dealing with
we're living
the
through it
public
right
sector.
now. We're living it right through with Syria right now. I mean, somebody who was supposed to be conscripted to fight in Vietnam because of the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which did not happen, the second one, and was a case of Americans being shot at because, gee whiz, they were in another country's territorial waters supporting people who were sabotaging facilities in northern Vietnam. I'm very sceptical of government information about things like Syria, and yes, you do want to have that, but how do you achieve it? I mean, partly Sir Humphrey's point there. The governments, there's an enormous amount of skullduggery going on inside governments, and what would happen with perfect information there?
Well, their answer, by the way, is a white paper on open government, because
what we need is rival. We need rival information systems. That's where the journalism should be doing, is being sceptical of what government has to say.
Yeah. So, okay, what about this then, just finally, because we are looking at information in lots of different ways. If you had perfect information on the stock exchange, and again, of course, you're talking about the future rather than the present, but if you had perfect information about the current situation, if you knew, for example, the real truth about what was happening behind companies that you are, because that is asymmetric information. The company obviously knows what's going on inside it. Investors don't. But if the investors knew everything about the company, and every investor, and here's another point as well, some people have more information than others because they can, for example, afford to buy it, or they're in a network that has access to that information. If everybody had the same access to the same information about companies on the stock exchange, the stock exchange wouldn't work, would it? Because it's entirely based on a gamble, based on asymmetric information.
Well, it's not asymmetric. It's asymmetric expectations that it's based upon, and this is where Warren Buffett, back to our previous show,
but those expectations
are based.
Those expectations are based on the information available, though.
No, they're based on uncertainty about the future, and people extrapolating what's happening now into the indefinite future.
Right.
There's
but you're extrapolating from information about what's happening now, but not everybody has access to the information about what's happening now. So if you're...
Well, even when they do have information, I mean, for example, back in the dot-com bubble, there were companies with massive valuations and negative cash flows, massively negative cash flows. I think Pets.com was probably the record in that situation, but you had people valuing company not on the basis of what was happening right now, because everybody knew it was going through a massive cash burn. And in fact, you were regarded as not being a good internet company if you were making money. You had to be losing money at this stage to gain market share. So people are saying, yes, we know it's got negative cash flows. Yes, it's got enormous debt. But look what's going to happen in the future. Everybody's going to buy their pets through pet.com. or their pet food to pet.com. Of course, it completely disappeared. And what's going on there is people sharing euphoric expectations about a particular asset class. This is Holminsky's idea about expectations and information. And it isn't the fact that we have differing information, not the information asymmetry. It's we share deluded expectations about the future because the future is uncertain and the end is always near, to quote the Doors. And in that world, people will fall back on the herd mentality to form their expectations about the future, and no degree of information about the present is going to stop that herding occurring.
Right. Yeah. So, which is a different issue, isn't it? So maybe the herd mentality is more influential than information is.
Far more. And this is the point that I information asymmetry to me is an interesting little wriggle on what doesn't exist in mainstream economics, which is an acknowledgement of uncertainty about the future and expectation formation under uncertainty. And that is by far the major factor in how we behave and how capitalism functions and malfunctions.
So what's our conclusion here? That asymmetric information exists, but we shouldn't worry about it?
Not particularly, but the points we should worry about, it's certainly the idea of government tender information being available and having more than one information source, because you have every reason to be sceptical of what the government's saying. Those things matter, but that's not going to. That they are not the major problems of the planet. It's these euphoric expectations we get locked into, and not controlling that, but acknowledging they exist in the very first instance is more important than getting reducing the degree of information asymmetry.
Right, and I should calm down about John Humphrys getting paid £600,000 per year. Good luck to him.
No, rail about it. You should take his place, mate. Get a decent voice on the BBC for a change.
All right. Well, I want 700 if they're going to take me, because I'm so much better than he is.
That's it. Yep, you go. Don't go undercut. You go offer to your. I'll give you a better deal if you pay me $1 million.
That's right. Yeah, actually, that's right. I'm actually worth 1.2 million because I'm twice as good as John is. Look, if you can get me for 800, then you're getting a bargain. Yeah, that's the tactic I'll use. All right, good to talk to Steve. Maybe the last time I talk to you, because obviously I'll be presenting the Today programme on Radio 4 from next week. But it's been nice knowing you. And that's it for this time. The Debunking Economics podcast will be back again with more stuff just like this next time. I'm Phil Dobbie. He's Professor Steve Keen. We'll see you next time.